I do not dismiss this belief. I have felt, in the writing of these pages, a pressure at my back, as of something vast and eyeless leaning close to read over my shoulder. In the preceding chapter, I have spoken in broad terms of the void and of that which inhabits it. Now I must speak more particularly, and in so doing I must commit what certain of the old adepts considered the gravest of transgressions. I must write the name of Azathoth, not once or in passing, but many times, and with the deliberate intention of setting down all that may be known of its nature. There are those among the initiates of the inner circles who hold that even to inscribe this name is to draw the attention of the thing named, that the very letters, set in their proper sequence, constitute a kind of summoning, a vibration in the fabric of the world that echoes inward and downward to the lightless throne. I do not dismiss this belief. I have felt, in the writing of these pages, a pressure at my back, as of something vast and eyeless leaning close to read over my shoulder. But the danger of silence is greater than the danger of speech. There are those who have attempted the rites described in the 8th book of this work without understanding what they were invoking, and their fates have been such that the witnesses were driven to madness merely by the telling. A man may survive the knowledge of Azathoth. No man survives the encounter with Azathoth unprepared. Therefore I write. Azathoth is known by many names and titles among the various peoples and traditions that have preserved some fragment of the primordial knowledge. In the language of the Pnakotic manuscripts, which is the oldest written tongue known to exist upon this earth, though it was not devised by any creature that could be called human, the name is rendered as a complex ideogram, signifying the hunger that was before, substance. Among the priests of ancient Kem, who preserved certain traditions older than their own civilization, it was known as Neok-Tuthep, a phrase meaning the formless begetter, not to be confused with Nyarlathotep, which is a distinct entity, and its emissary, though the similarity of the names has led many students astray. In the debased cult of Leng, where fragments of the truth have been preserved, in forms so corrupted that they are more dangerous than the truth itself, Azathoth is called simply that which sits for in Leng. They do not believe that Azathoth gnaws or dreams or hungers, but merely sits, eternal and immovable, while all of reality whirls around it like dust caught in a drain. I shall set down here the principal titles by which Azathoth is known in the various traditions I have studied, for each title reveals an aspect of its nature, and the whole may be apprehended, however dimly, through the contemplation of the parts. The Daemon Sultan, for it sits at the center of all, and all things serve it, though they know it not. The blind idiot god, for it possesses neither sight nor reason, and its power is not guided by any intellect. The nuclear chaos, for it is the heart of the primal confusion, from which all order is a temporary and local aberration. The primal hunger, for it existed before the concept of satiation, and shall persist when there is nothing left to consume. The Lord of all things, for there is nothing in the cosmos that is not, ultimately, an emanation of its dreaming. The Abyssal Sultan, for its throne is in the deepest pit of the uttermost void, beyond the reach of light, thought, or prayer. He who gnaws, for even in its torpor it devours, and the substance of reality is ground between its jaws. There are other names, names in tongues that no human mouth can shape, names written in scripts that cause the eyes to bleed and the mind to fracture. But these 7 will suffice for the purposes of this treatise. Let the reader note, however, that none of these names is the true name of Azathoth. The true name is not a sound but a frequency, not a word but a vibration that, if it were ever perfectly reproduced, would unmake the speaker, the listener, and every material thing within the reach of its resonance. The true name of Azathoth is the note to which the universe is tuned, and to speak it is to untune that instrument entirely. Of the throne of Azathoth, I can speak only from what I have gleaned from the most ancient texts, and from what was shown to me in visions, for I have not, praise be to whatever powers may be indifferent to my fate, been brought bodily into that ultimate abyss. Others have. The witch Keziah Mason of Arkham, who discovered that the angles of certain rooms, if measured and traversed with the proper understanding, open upon corridors that lead between the dimensions. She, according to the testimony preserved in the court records of the Salem trials, claimed to have stood before the throne and to have signed her name in the Book of Azathoth with her own blood. The court records describe her words thus: that she had been carried through the angles of space to a place that was no place, where darkness sat upon a throne of darkness, and that the messenger had bid her write her name in a great black book, and that in exchange she had been given knowledge of the passages between the walls of the world and the power to walk them at her will, and that the price was that she must serve and bring others to serve, until the stars should come right and the sleepers wake. What Mason described as a place that was no place accords precisely with the accounts given in the Panachatic fragments and in certain passages of the Comorium cycle, which I obtained from the vaults beneath the plateau of Zath. The throne of Azathoth is not located in any spatial sense. It is not a point that can be reached by traveling in a direction. It is rather the conceptual center of all that exists. The still point around which the entirety of the cosmos rotates. The axis upon which all dimensions are threaded. It exists at the intersection of all possible geometries, in a region where the conventional properties of space extension, direction, distance have no meaning. The geometry that leads there is not Euclidean, but something older and more fundamental. A geometry of angles that do not add to the expected sums, of lines that curve in directions the eye cannot follow, of spaces that are larger on the inside than on the outside. This is, I believe, what Mason stumbled upon in the curiously angled attic of her house in Arkham, a set of architectural proportions that, whether by accident or by the design of some builder who possessed forbidden knowledge, replicated in miniature the angular relationships necessary to open a passage to the interstitial spaces. Those cracks in the fabric of the world through which one may, if one knows the way, travel to any point in the cosmos, including the uttermost center where the Daemon Sultan sits. That Mason was a woman of no formal education in mathematics makes her discovery all the more remarkable, and suggests that the ability to perceive these forbidden geometries may be less a matter of learning than of a certain innate sensitivity, a sensitivity that is, in itself, a kind of curse. I must now address the matter of the Book of Azathoth, for it is a subject upon which much confusion and error have accumulated. This book is not a text in the ordinary sense, not a manuscript, or a codex, or a scroll. It is an artifact of a nature for which human experience provides no adequate analogy. It exists at the throne of Azathoth, in the guardianship of Nyarlathotep, and it has existed there since before the creation of the earth, since before the first star kindled in the void. It is as old as Azathoth itself, and there are those who say it is Azathoth that the book and the Daemon Sultan are one and the same, and that to write in it is to inscribe oneself upon the substance of the nuclear chaos, to become a part of the dream. What is written in the Book of Azathoth? No one who has signed it has retained enough coherent sanity to provide a full account. What fragments of testimony exist chiefly from the Salem proceedings, but also from certain accounts preserved in the records of the Inquisition at Goa, and from the confessions extracted by the Tribunal of Alhambra, suggest that the book contains names, only names. An endless catalogue of names, written in every script that has ever been devised and in many that have not, stretching back through aeons of time to the first creature that was capable of possessing a name. Every being that has ever pledged itself to the service of the outer gods, or that has been claimed by them, or that has been consumed by them, is recorded in the book. To sign it is to add oneself to this catalogue. It is, in the most literal sense, a surrender of identity, for once one's name is inscribed in the book, one's identity belongs no longer to oneself but to that which owns the book. The act of signing is accomplished with the signer's own blood, drawn from the wrist by means of a sharp instrument provided by the messenger. The blood does not dry upon the page. It sinks into it, absorbed as water is absorbed by sand, and where it has been absorbed, the surface of the page changes color, becoming neither lighter nor darker, but somehow more dense, as if the very concept of color has been compressed into a smaller space. Those who have seen the open book describe the pages as black, but not uniformly so, rather a swirling, mottled black, like the surface of a liquid in slow agitation, or like the sky on a moonless night when the clouds are moving. It is written in the Liber Ivonis that the book has no first page and no last page, that it extends infinitely in both directions, and that the names recorded at its beginning are the names of entities that existed before the current cosmos, and that will exist after its dissolution. If this is true, then the book is not merely a record, but a kind of architecture, a structure that contains within itself the blueprint of everything that has ever served the nuclear chaos. It is a roster of the damned, and the roster has no end. I have spoken in the preceding chapter of the piping that sustains the dream of Azathoth. Let me now describe, as fully as my knowledge permits, the nature of those entities which produce this sound, and the court in which they perform their endless and mindless service. Surrounding the throne of the Daemon Sultan, at a distance that cannot be measured in any unit known to man, there cavort and gyrate the other gods, those entities which are the first and most direct products of Azathoth's dreaming. They are amorphous, which is to say they possess no fixed shape, but constantly writhe and shift and flow, assuming momentary configurations that suggest now a limb, now a maw, now an eye, only to dissolve again into formlessness before the impression can fully register. They are vast. Each of them is larger than the largest sun that burns in the visible sky, though their substance is not that of matter as we know it, but something more primal, a stuff that predates the division of energy and matter, of wave and particle, of being and non-being. They are blind, for in the abyssal dark where they dwell there is nothing to see. They are mute, save for the piping. They are mindless, for mind is a property of organized matter, and their matter is the antithesis of organization. And yet, they dance. This is, perhaps, the most terrible detail in the entire account of the cosmos as it truly is. That the ultimate powers of the universe, the entities closest to the primal source of all existence, spend eternity dancing, not dancing in the manner of celebration, or worship, or artistic expression, but dancing in the manner of particles in Brownian motion, agitated, purposeless, random, propelled by forces they do not understand and cannot resist. Their dance is the physical expression of the void's fundamental restlessness, the ceaseless churning of chaos that underlies the apparent stillness of the cosmos. And the piping that accompanies them is not music but entropy made audible, the sound of order dissolving, of structures collapsing, of meaning disintegrating into noise. Among the dancers, though, whether they are truly other gods or something else entirely is a matter of dispute. Among the few scholars who have dared to study these questions are the entities I designate as the Daemon Pipers, or the flautists of Azathoth. These are distinguished from the general mass of the other gods by one crucial property. They produce the piping. They are, if you will, the orchestra of the abyss, the musicians whose ceaseless and monotonous performance keeps the Daemon Sultan in its state of dreaming torpor, and prevents it from either waking or ceasing to dream entirely. They play upon instruments that are not instruments, producing sounds that are not sounds, in accordance with a rhythm that is not a rhythm, but rather the fundamental pulse of chaos itself. I have felt this pulse in the depths beneath the nameless city, where I descended that titanic stairway of which I spoke in the preceding chapter. The vibration was so strong that it shook the fillings from my teeth and caused my bones to ache as if they were being slowly ground to powder. It was not merely audible, it was tactile, visceral, organic. It entered through the soles of my feet and rose through my body and settled in my skull. And for the space of several hours after my ascent, I could not distinguish between the beating of my own heart and the beating of that abyssal pulse. They had synchronized. My heart, for those hours, beat in time with the rhythm of Azathoth's dreaming, and I understood in my marrow what my intellect had only previously grasped in theory. That we are all of us already part of the dream, and that the dream is all there is. But what manner of dreaming is this? The question is not idle, for upon the answer depends our understanding of the nature of reality itself, of everything that is, including ourselves and the world we inhabit, and the stars we observe, and the laws we have discerned, and the gods we have invented, and the hopes we have cherished. Human dreaming is, as the physicians tell us, a function of the sleeping mind, a reorganization of impressions gathered during waking hours, a discharge of accumulated nervous energy, perhaps a rehearsal of responses to anticipated dangers. The dreamer generates images and sensations from the material of memory and experience. But Azathoth has no memory, for it has never been conscious. Azathoth has no experience, for it has never perceived. Azathoth's dreaming is therefore not a reorganization of prior impressions, but a creation ex nihilo, a generation of forms and substances and laws and worlds and beings from the raw material of absolute nothing. This is why the universe appears to have been designed, not because a designer exists, but because the dreaming of Azathoth produces patterns. As the random currents of a river produce whirlpools and eddies that possess a momentary and accidental beauty before dissolving back into the general flow. We are the whirlpools. Our solar system, our planet, our species, our civilizations, our individual lives, all of these are patterns thrown up by the churning of the ultimate chaos. Patterns that persist for an instant of cosmic time and then dissolve. We perceive ourselves as substantial and enduring only because our lives are so short that we cannot perceive the dissolution. A mayfly, born at dawn and dead at dusk, might suppose the weather to be a permanent condition. So we, whose entire species has existed for the merest flicker of geological time. Suppose the laws of nature and the arrangement of the cosmos to be fixed and eternal. They are not. They are as temporary as the mayfly's summer. There is a passage in the Culte des Goules of the Comte d'Erlet, a degenerate and debased text, but one which preserves certain truths that more respectable works have suppressed, which addresses this point with a clarity that I have not found elsewhere. The stars are not eternal, though they seem so to creatures who live and die in the space of a breath. The laws by which they burn and move are not eternal. Even the dimensions through which they move are not eternal. All of these things are the current configuration of the dream, and the dream shifts. And when the dream shifts, what was law becomes chaos, and what was impossible becomes inevitable. And what was real becomes a memory in the mind of nothing. This is correct in its essentials, though Delet, writing from the debased perspective of a European occultist rather than from direct apprehension of the texts, mistakes the nature of the shift. The dream of Azathoth does not shift suddenly as a sleeper turns in bed. It shifts constantly, in infinitesimal increments, and the shifts accumulate over aeons until the accumulated difference between what was and what is becomes so great that the old patterns can no longer sustain themselves. This is what the astronomers call the precession of the equinoxes. This is what the occultists call the turning of the eons. This is what the pnacotic fragments call, with characteristic bluntness, the rotting of the dream. For dreams, even the dreams of gods, decay. They begin with a kind of vigor, a coherence, a vividness, and over time they degrade, becoming more chaotic, more contradictory, more infested with intrusions from the underlying void. Have you never noticed, reader, how a dream that begins with clarity gradually becomes confused? How the logic of the dream world frays at the edges? How figures transform into other figures, and places shift, and the rules that governed the first moments of the dream cease to apply. So it is with the dream of Azathoth. Though the timescales are measured in billions of years rather than minutes, the cosmos we inhabit is an old dream. Its patterns are fraying, its coherence is failing. And the intrusions, the moments when the underlying chaos bleeds through into the ordered surface of reality, are becoming more frequent. These intrusions are what the common folk call the supernatural. They are not supernatural at all. They are the natural reasserting itself against the artificial, the chaos reclaiming territory from the order, the void fingering the cracks in the thin shell of structure and meaning that we have mistaken for the whole of reality. Every ghost, every haunting, every inexplicable manifestation, every creature that should not exist, every violation of natural law, all of these are symptoms of the dream's decay. And the rate of decay is accelerating. I come now to the matter which I have been approaching throughout this chapter, and which I confess I approach with dread even now, after all I have seen and all I have learned. For the full contemplation of it is more than the human mind was designed to bear. I speak of the ending of the dream. The dream of Azathoth will end. Of this there is no doubt. It will end because all dreams end, and because the forces that sustain the dream, the piping of the daemon flautists, the dancing of the other gods, the stabilizing influence of certain configurations of matter and energy within the dream itself, are not inexhaustible. The pipers grow weary, or rather, the pattern of their piping degrades over time, as a melody played endlessly will gradually accumulate errors until it bears no resemblance to the original tune. The dancers slow, or rather, the rhythm of their dancing loses its coherence, its ability to maintain the resonance necessary to keep the Daemon Sultan in its state of generative torpor. And when the rhythm finally breaks, when the last trace of pattern dissolves into randomness, Azathoth will wake. What will happen then? The question can be answered with a simplicity that belies its horror. When Azathoth wakes, the dream will end. When the dream ends, everything that exists within the dream will cease to exist. Not die for death implies a transition from one state to another, and there will be no other state to transition to. Not be destroyed for destruction implies that the constituent parts survive in altered form, and no constituent parts will survive. The stars, the worlds, the seas, the mountains, the forests, the cities, the peoples, the animals, the insects, the very atoms of which all these things are composed, all of it will simply cease to be, as a dream ceases to be when the dreamer opens his eyes. There will be no fire, no flood, no cataclysm. There will simply be nothing where something had been, and the nothing will be absolute, and it will be eternal, and it will be as if none of it had ever existed at all. For it will not have existed. That is the final and most devastating truth. A dream has no independent reality. It exists only in the mind of the dreamer, and when the dreamer wakes, the dream has not merely ended, but has been retroactively annulled. It never was. The dreamer may retain a memory of it, a fading impression, a lingering mood, but the dream itself, with all its seeming solidity and complexity and meaning, was never anything more than a pattern of electrical impulses in a sleeping brain. So it will be with us. When Azathoth wakes, we will not merely die, we will never have lived. The entire history of the cosmos, from the first flickering of the first star to the last thought of the last sentient mind, will be revealed to have been a hallucination in the mind of a mindless god. And the hallucination will end, and there will be nothing at all, and the nothing will not even know that it is nothing, for there will be no one left to know. And yet, there are those who worship Azathoth. This is a fact that I record with bewilderment and with horror, for the worship of Azathoth is the purest form of nihilism imaginable, the adoration of that which will annihilate the adorers, and not merely annihilate, but retroactively unmake them, as though they had never been. I have encountered such worshippers in my travels. In the depths of the empty quarter, among certain tribes that have no name and no recorded history, who dwell in cave systems so deep that the surface world is to them a legend, I found men and women who had given themselves wholly to the service of the nuclear chaos. They performed their rites in chambers carved from living rock. Chambers whose proportions had been calculated by what genius of perverted mathematics I cannot say to resonate with the fundamental pulse of Azathoth's dreaming. The walls of these chambers were covered in inscriptions, an endless repetition of the names and titles of the Daemon Sultan, spiraling inward and inward, each repetition slightly smaller than the last, until the characters were too small for the human eye to read, and then smaller still, continuing beyond the threshold of visibility, as if the engraver had possessed senses more acute than any human faculty. The worshippers themselves were changed. I do not mean merely that their minds had been altered by their devotion, though this was certainly the case. They spoke in a sing-song cadence that echoed the rhythm of the piping, and their eyes had acquired a glassy, unfocused quality, as though they were looking not at the visible world but through it, to something beyond. I mean that their bodies had changed. Their skin had taken on a grayish, translucent quality, as though the substance of their flesh was becoming less solid, less opaque, less entirely present in the material world. When they moved, their movements were subtly wrong, too fluid, too boneless, as though the skeletal framework that gives the human body its characteristic rigidity had begun to soften and dissolve. They were, I realized with a horror that I can still feel as I write these words, becoming more like the other gods. Their worship was not merely a spiritual submission, but a physical transformation. They were dissolving into the dream, losing their individual forms, reverting to the amorphous, protoplasmic state, that is, the natural condition of matter before the dream imposes structure upon it. I did not stay long in those caves. I could feel the pulse of the piping growing stronger in my own flesh, and I knew that if I remained too long, the process of dissolution would begin in me as well. I fled upward through miles of darkness, until I burst out onto the desert floor under a sky of terrible and indifferent stars, and I lay there for a long time, trembling, feeling the bones within my body and thanking them, each one, for their solidity. I must record one final thing in this chapter, though I do so against the strongest inclinations of my reason and my self-preservation. I must record the vision. It came to me on the 49th night after my descent into the nameless city, a number which I suspect is not without significance. For 7 times 7 is a configuration that appears repeatedly in the oldest formulae. I had been sleeping badly since my return from the subterranean depths, plagued by dreams in which the piping was always present, sometimes distant, sometimes so close that I woke with the taste of it in my mouth like copper. But on the 49th night, the dream was different. I found myself standing in a space that was not a space, a region without dimension or direction, without up or down, without light or darkness, for these are properties of the dream, and I was, in this vision, outside the dream. I could perceive the dream. It hung before me, or around me, or within me. The spatial metaphors are inadequate, like an immense translucent sphere, and within it I could see everything, every star, every world, every ocean, every grain of sand, every living creature, every thought that had ever been thought, and every thought that would ever be thought, all of it compressed into a single luminous whole, shimmering and pulsing with a beauty that was all the more devastating for being so fragile, so utterly contingent, so dependent upon the continued dreaming of the thing upon whose lap the sphere rested. For I could see Azathoth, or rather, I could perceive it. For sight is a function of light, and there was no light in this place, and Azathoth is not a thing that can be seen. I perceived it as one perceives a presence in a dark room, an awareness of mass, of proximity, of immensity, of a breathing that was not breathing, of a hunger that was not hunger, of an existence so vast and so ancient and so utterly devoid of consciousness that my mind could find no purchase upon it, and slid away again and again, as the eye slides away from a shape it cannot resolve. It was holding the sphere, the dream, the cosmos, all of reality, the way a sleeping man might hold an apple in his loosely curled fist, not grasping it, not protecting it, not even aware of it. Simply holding it, because it happened to be there, because it had been generated by the processes of its dreaming, and had come to rest in the curve of its unknowing grip, and the sphere was so small, against the inconceivable vastness of Azathoth, the entirety of creation, every galaxy, every civilization, every love, every loss, every act of courage and every act of cruelty. Everything humanity has ever been, and ever hoped to be, was a mote, a fleck, a speck of luminous dust resting in the palm of an idiot's unconscious hand. And as I watched, the hand twitched. Only slightly. The merest contraction of whatever served it for muscles. A tremor no greater than the twitch of a sleeper disturbed by a distant noise. But the sphere shuddered in the grip of that twitch. And I saw, or perceived, galaxies collide, and stars go dark, and worlds crack open like eggs, and the vacuum of space ripple and distort, as though the very dimensions were being kneaded like dough by invisible fingers. Billions upon billions of beings, on billions upon billions of worlds, were extinguished in the time it takes a heart to beat, and they never knew what had killed them. And the thing that killed them never knew they had existed, and the whole catastrophe was, in the scale of Azathoth, less than the death of a single cell in the body of a sleeping man. I woke, screaming. I am not ashamed to say so. Any man who could behold what I beheld and not scream is either a liar or something other than a man. I have set down in this chapter what I know of Azathoth, its names, its nature, its throne, its book, its court, its dreaming, and the manner of the dream's eventual dissolution. I have described these things as clearly and as fully as my faculties permit, and I have held nothing back, though the holding back was tempting at every turn. The reader who has persevered to this point deserves a word of counsel, which is this: do not attempt to verify what I have written. There are rituals, described in the 8th book, by which the adept may project his consciousness toward the throne of the Daemon Sultan. There are formulae by which the piping may be heard, even at this great distance from the source. There are geometries by which the walls of the world may be thinned, and the void beneath made partially perceptible. Do not employ them for the purpose of confirming the account I have given in this chapter. The account is true. I have paid for its truth with portions of my sanity that I shall never recover, and with years of my life that have been burned away like paper in a fire. Trust the words of a man who has seen, and be grateful that you have not. For the knowledge of Azathoth is a wound that does not heal. The piping, once heard, is never entirely unheard. The vision, once seen, is never entirely unseen. It waits behind every closed eyelid, in every moment of silence, in the small hours of the night when the rational mind loosens its grip, and the deeper mind, the old mind, the animal mind, the mind that knows without knowing how it knows, stirs and remembers and is afraid. I hear it now, as I write, the piping, always the piping. It is fainter tonight than last night, or perhaps I am merely more accustomed to it, and that thought frightens me more than the sound itself. For what does it mean to become accustomed to the sound of ultimate chaos? What does it mean when the pulse of Azathoth's dreaming begins to feel natural, begins to synchronize with the rhythms of one's own body, begins to feel less like an intrusion from outside and more like a homecoming? It means, I think, that the dissolution has begun. It means that I am becoming what those worshippers in the caves had become. It means that the dream is reclaiming me, that the form the dream imposed upon the raw chaos of my substance is beginning to soften, to blur, to revert. I do not know how long I have. I do not know whether the completion of this book will arrest the process or accelerate it. I know only that I must continue to write, for the knowledge must survive me, even if I do not survive the knowledge.
Editor's note. The marginal annotations in the Wormius manuscript grow increasingly erratic from this point forward. Several passages in the original Arabic, preserved in Wormius's apparatus, contain words and phrases that do not correspond to any known language, Arabic or otherwise. Dr. D's English translation omits the entirety of sections 7 through 10 of this chapter, substituting a brief note in cipher that reads, when decoded, "I dare not Englishy these passages, for the reading of them in the vulgar tongue works upon the Mindi in ways I cannot account for. H. W. A."